Take a moment. Forget the rat race and the hectic rush of modern life. You could put all that behind you. Maybe listen to the calling seagulls. Take a look at the waves. You could pick up a board and get out there in the surf, maybe catch a big one. You could sit around a campfire in the sand and tell stories about the big waves around Malibu and Sunset Point. It's a real way of life, or was, once. Welcome to Santa Monica, California. There was a time when a certain kind of guy came out of the beach towns of California, invariably tanned, good-looking, usually blonde. They had to look to them, those guys. They could kick a ball, swing a bat, ride a horse, and ride a wave. They were a breed of Americans who seemed to spring out of the very earth. When Hollywood movie directors needed to find a clean-cut American leading man, they could just pluck one off the beach any time. Back in the 1950s, it wasn't necessary to fake a sort of sun-kissed natural American look. The real thing was right here. It wasn't to last, of course. Nothing ever does. In time, it became necessary to manufacture stars on a production line of talent, made to order. But for a while, in places like this, the real things seemed to come naturally. Robert Redford was born in Santa Monica in 1936, and if ever there was a natural, it was him. Sports seemed to come easy, and he scored a scholarship to the University of Colorado as a baseball player when he wasn't skiing around the Rockies. But the natural came up against what he saw as a new and essentially fake kind of sportsman. Rather than playing for the love of the game, he was up against players who saw everything as a clinical test to be scored on. At some point, he became disillusioned and stopped going to practice, eventually washing out. Redford could have played the game well enough to carry him through life with ease, but instead, he refused to treat the honest love of what he was doing like it was just a job. That right there tells you a lot about the man. Maybe everything you really need to know. He got the idea of becoming an artist, and bummed around Paris long enough to realize it wasn't exactly going to work out, and returned home to try scenic design for theater instead. He was told that in order to understand how to design a scene, he had to see things from an actor's point of view, and so he enrolled in the American Academy of Dramatic Arts. You know, just to give the acting thing a try for a while. Redford didn't initially see himself as a classical actor, but within a year he had made it on Broadway and ended up in some significant plays, working with the likes of great playwright Neil Simon in the comedy Barefoot in the Park in 1961. Back then it was considered normal for a successful play to find itself repeated on the big screen, and so it was that the natural took a couple of parts in film. He played opposite Jane Fonda in the film version of the play Tall Story, and again opposite her when Barefoot in the Park got the screen treatment. For someone who had just drifted into acting, it seemed like a pretty good fit. Over the course of the 60s, he appeared in various films he liked the look of, and he had no problem turning down roles that he didn't like the look of. He could have appeared in Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf or Rosemary's Baby. They were offered, but he preferred work that he connected with, even if it wasn't an obvious career choice. Redford seemed to have a way of easily navigating his way around the peaks and troughs of Hollywood. And Dustin Hoffman once called him a walking surfboard, and in many ways he was the epitome of the easygoing beach town lifestyle brought to life for America to aspire to. Then, at the end of the 60s, he starred with Paul Newman in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, a cowboy movie shot at a time that America was uncertain whether it really wanted cowboys anymore. Times were getting rough. The 70s were on the horizon, and the old certainties were starting to look a little shaky. Like a beloved older brother reaching out a hand, Redford picked us all up and dusted us off, and helped to invent the buddy movie while he was at it. Butch and Sundance was a gigantic hit, and spawned a whole new genre of film for a new decade, with naturalistic, easygoing performances that showcased the love and camaraderie between men in tricky situations. Over the 70s, the big hits kept coming, but the natural knew when to turn with the big waves. America was becoming tense, paranoid, and straight up mean, and Redford's movies reflected a changing and troubled world. He became the weather-beaten face of old-world charm in a cold new light, and more politically challenging and even controversial roles in the likes of The Candidate and All the President's Men. Redford could still turn on the charm, but he didn't forget to add the heat. All that being the case, it seems only right for Robert Redford to have played the role of Jay Gatsby in 1974 in the film adaptation of The Great Gatsby. If you thought that story is all about parties and staring wistfully out of windows, you haven't been paying attention. Gatsby was the self-made American man who could have had it all, but would have thrown it away in an instant in exchange for something real. Redford felt something of a kindred spirit, perhaps. Dark times never last. Every night turned towards the dawn eventually, and when it was time to say, "Good morning, America," Robert Redford seemed to simply drift into place, welcoming the 80s with a cup of coffee and a smile. He spent his later years on more sentimental fare, directing family drama Ordinary People, and getting an Oscar for his trouble, and romancing Meryl Streep in Out of Africa. This was the era of Robert Redford, the American man who was still the way we like to think Americans used to be. Strong but not strident, forthright but thoughtful. Big Brother became charming uncle. As the decades passed, Redford aged with dignity and grace the way old Hollywood used to teach its leading men to do. He would turn up in passion projects and movies that spoke to his talents, like seafaring one-man drama All Is Lost and A Walk in the Woods. He even showed up in a Marvel movie to add a little 1970s gravitas to the Winter Soldier when Marvel wanted to do Paranoia. But aside from a career in movies, Robert Redford always did what seemed like the right thing to do. He formed the Institute for Resource Management, dedicated to helping land developers take environmental concerns into account, and started the Sundance Film Festival, which for 40 years has helped new independent movies get made and, more importantly, get seen. Important to note, neither of these efforts carry Robert Redford's name over the door. He wouldn't want to seem bigger than the work, after all. Yes, there was a time when you could come here to Santa Monica and take in the sun and the sea and get out there surfing. A time when the horizon seemed clear and the way ahead was just over the next wave, and there was a kind of guy who came out of the sun and the sea and showed us all a golden time that we wished we'd been a part of. Robert Redford passed away on September the 16th, 2025. He did a lot, and he made it look like it was hardly an effort. Something has left the world now, and maybe one day the sea will be kind enough to bring those times back to us. In the meantime, we have the beach and the stories, and that will have to be enough for now. Profiles in Cinemania is a production of the Cinemania Society, LLC. This episode was written by Andy Slack, music by Carl Casey at White Bat Audio, incidental sound courtesy of Epidemic Sound.